How the heck can I get a mortgage for my cabin at the lake? Ian Leverington with RFA Bank joins us this week to tell you how to get a mortgage for your dream property. Hope you enjoy.
You're listening to the Saskatchewan Real Estate Podcast, where we chat with real estate experts from across the province to learn what's happening in the real estate market. Here's your host, Ron Quaroni.
Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Ron Quaroni, your Saskatchewan mortgage professional, and today very happy to have Ian Leverington on the line with RFA. And Ian, we're talking about, I think, Saskatchewan's favorite topic today. That's the lake property and second home. So Ian, first off, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ron. I'm happy to join you and talk about kind of a fun topic. I was actually just having a chat with my brother who's living in Germany right now about pretty much the same subject. He was talking about, buying a, second property and investment properties. And I was like, well, why don't you guys get, like you're living in Europe, get yourself a vacation property and then we can come use it when we stay there. And I'm like, everybody seems to do the same thing in Saskatchewan. Like you're saying, everybody wants, there's a ton of lakes here. Everybody wants to have that lakefront property if possible. I don't have one yet, but that's definitely a goal for myself as well.
The picturesque Saskatchewan summer. Before we get into second homes, Ian, let's hear a little bit about you. How long have you been in the lending business, and how did you find yourself in the position that you find yourself now?
For sure. I'm based out of Regina. I work for RFA Mortgage Corporation. I worked for RFA, which was, or I guess I'll say formerly Street is where I started before RFA bought them. So I started with Street in 2018. And before that, I was actually a mortgage broker myself for a number of years. I think I got my license in 2013 or 2014, something like that. So I've been in the industry, I guess 7 or 8 years now, if I'm doing the math correctly, and enjoying it for sure. It's definitely an interesting, kind of line of work and industry. Things are always changing, really trying to keep tabs on all the rules and qualification guidelines keeps a person on their toes for sure, no matter whether you're on the lender side or the broker side, I guess.
Yeah, it is kind of a beast in itself that there's lots of policies that are always updated, new promos, new things to be happening. And it seems like, every week and month, there's something new to learn about the industry.
Yeah, I agree. It's always, you gotta stay on top of the news and, the updates coming from the insurers or OSFI or whoever it is to make sure that you're in the know of what's happening now and what's coming up. We just had these, qualifying rule changes, it's just starting June 1st here. So, it seems to be a regular thing in the industry now.
5.25%. Yeah. All right, Ian. So let's expand on the notion of having a second home. And it might sound weird to someone, like, what is a second home property?
For sure. So, there's, each person might look at that a little differently. When you ask, what is a second home to you, I guess, someone might think of a second home being a property that they have purchased that's going to primarily be occupied by, an immediate family member of theirs or family in general. Or the next person you ask, they might think of that as being, a property that they live, maybe an hour or 2 hours outside of the city. Maybe they live in a nice lakefront property year round. But they work in the city, they work downtown, and they're just trying to avoid a commute. So maybe they own a condo or something like that in the city, and they live there, during the work week, and and then they live at home and they live in the lakefront property during the weekends, or vice versa. They live in the city and then maybe they've got a vacation home somewhere that they travel to and they spend some time there. So there's different combinations of that. I think these days people are certainly spending a lot more time or I could say a lot less time commuting, as a lot of us with the office jobs might be, working from home or working from that cottage property a lot more often than what we used to.
Right. And so there are those folks now where we're at a weird time with COVID where more people are working from home And we also might be saving a lot more money if we're not going on vacations. We're not really going outside of, we'd say, our geographical region. And maybe we're looking to spend some more time here in Saskatchewan during the summer. But someone's looking out there and they're wondering, how hard is it to finance one of these properties? Is it just as simple as getting into your primary residence?
So it's a good question. In a lot of cases, financing a second home or a vacation property, a lot of the guidelines that a prospective borrower would need to meet are very similar. In fact, you can buy a second home or vacation property with as little as 5% down, pending that you're able to meet the minimum qualifying guidelines. Set in place by the regulators, so the insurers, if it's a high ratio mortgage like that, and of course by your individual lender. RFA, is going to have different, minimum guidelines than the next. As far as qualifying goes, there are a lot of general guidelines, like I said, that are the same, but there are other guidelines that might be a little more specific in terms of maybe property location or something like that.
Wonderful. So when we're talking about specifically here in Saskatchewan, a lot of second home properties would be cabins and cottages. Now, sometimes it can be tough with a cabin and cottage because there are certain things that are involved with those properties that make them uninsurable, or they have to have certain stipulations. Can we talk about some of the things that would make a property the side that we could lend on and the side we could not lend on? Does that make sense, Ian?
So the difference between what we can't, like a cottage or lake property that we can provide financing on, and something that somebody would not.
Which properties would we be able to get them a mortgage for, and we wouldn't? And what comes to my mind is that you might have the property with no insulation, no running water, and it's 500 square feet.
Yeah, so that's a good question. That was kind of what I was alluding to. I didn't want to jump too far ahead, on questions or some of those details. But yeah, it's a good question, because I think from what I tend to see, that's the usually the sticking points. So in general, one of the first things, if you are mentioning that it's a second property or lakefront or something like that, you need to be, as a buyer, when you're searching for these properties, you need to be aware of, where is it located? And certainly if it's, as a lender, we will look at, the guidelines a little bit differently. If it's a high ratio insured type of mortgage that you're requiring, or if, you're putting at least 20% down, or for some reason it's an uninsurable mortgage, then we might be a little bit tighter, or a little, looking for a little more detail as far as just the lending location. But as far as what we will and won't lend on, I guess another question or another thing to look out for is it, a four-season property, as we call it. So that means it needs to be accessible by a road as well. It needs to be insulated properly. There needs to be, some kind of a standard heating source. All your utilities and services, I guess. So a standard heating source, a standard source for water. A sewer system or sewer hookup, like a septic tank might be acceptable. A standard property that person might be buying is, it has municipal hookups for their water and sewer access. Where, lakefront properties are not always the case. Often we see we can see some fairly unique types of setups. So, that's I think a question that you want to discuss with your mortgage broker, right? Like yourself. If someone's looking at that type of a property. Same thing with your heat and electrical sources. There's some things that are acceptable to us as a lender, and other systems. There's a lot of people looking to do like an off-the-grid setup these days, right? Solar panels and solar systems are all the craze these days, maybe. So anyway, so that type of a system we may not have, lending options for. But at the end of the day, I think the best way to go about it, because there can be so many different, unique criteria on a property like that versus, any property you might find in Saskatoon or Regina, for example, oftentimes they're going to have, relatively standard setups for the utilities. But as soon as you get more rural like that or something on the lake, then it's going to be a bit more unique. And I think the best way to approach that is talk to a mortgage professional, talk to a mortgage broker, discuss the types of properties you're looking at. And I think someone like yourself, you understand these details better than the average person might, and you could probably help guide them in the right direction so they don't fall in love with the property that they can't get any financing on, maybe. So
much in the same way that I think maybe as rental properties can sometimes fall under different guidelines and how different lenders will handle those different offsets and add backs and the rental income. Maybe it's in the same way with these cabin properties, that it's a good idea maybe to, before you go ahead and put an offer in with no condition of financing, to just have a little conversation about what you're looking to buy and kind of go over some of that stuff ahead of time.
Yeah, I agree. And that's, you bring up another good point, because just like I kind of alluded to the conversation I was having with my brother this morning about, investment properties and a vacation property. And sometimes those, people are thinking about those the same way. And, I believe that, someone who's a prospective buyer, especially if you're not from the industry, you're not thinking about things in advance the same way that, you or I might if we're mortgage professionals. We know, okay, if you're buying something that's dedicated to be a rental property, it has to fit these guidelines. If it's a dedicated vacation property or second home, it needs to fit these guidelines, right? And so that's a good example. So if the purpose of that property is that it's going to be a rental, a vacation rental, there's different ways that we'll look at that. So if it's a rental property as a long-term rental, we may be able to consider that, but down payment requirement automatically goes up to at least 20%. If it's a vacation rental, where it's, short, like the Airbnb thing, right? Someone looking to, do nightly rentals or short-term rentals. Certainly that may be a great idea as an investor or financially. And but as far as mortgage lending goes, we may not be able to provide financing, or as a prospective borrower, you might have a difficult time getting financing for that type of property.
I know someone is out there kind of like banging the computer screen right now, Ian, saying like, well, why would that matter if it's an Airbnb or if it's going to be my place? Why does that matter to the lender? Can you quickly touch on the different factors that go into those decisions to say that, we're not going to lend on Airbnbs?
I think it's overall just it's a risk factor of the your income on that property. So something that a typical type of rental property we would look at would be something where there's a long-term agreement in place. You've seen this before, I'm sure. Document requirements where we're going to look for a 1-year lease. Knowing that that property, especially if we're lending and debt servicing that mortgage application based on income being derived from that property and from a tenant, we want to see that there is stable income coming from that, right? Where, not to say that somebody may not potentially be able to earn some stable income from a nightly or short-term rental. Looking at that though is that, there's not a guarantee there, right? You're not doing a long-term agreement. So you're not being able to see, we're not able to see as much of a comfort level in terms of regular income that we can try to qualify on or use that to try to debt service that property. And it can be a seasonal factor as well, right? We don't necessarily live somewhere where, you can have, some properties may not always be fully seasonal in terms of not necessarily being able to use the property, but in terms of, the peak seasons for being able to earn income from that. So there's just too many variables and unknowns with something that's short-term or nightly rental versus something that is long-term.
Before we wrap this up, Ian, is there anything else to add on second homes, cabins, cottages before we move off to the last questions here?
Again, I mean, it's one of those things where I think there's a lot of different ways you can look at it. We're talking about, rental versus vacation property, or it's a vacation rental, or, lending location, the types of specific plumbing systems you need to have or heating systems you need to have. It can be a lot for somebody to try to manage and think about all at the same time that you're excited, thinking about, fulfilling your dream of owning a lakefront cottage or something like that. So I'm just, a double down on that all the time on saying, talk to a mortgage professional, talk to a mortgage broker, get those details in advance and have that conversation and have somebody on your side that you can pick up the phone and say, hey, we're really wanting to put an offer in on this property. Can you look at these details for me and tell me if this is going to fit? I know we had this conversation in advance, but I'm not sure about X, Y, and Z. It's got a unique kind of boiler system for heating or whatever. They can talk to a mortgage broker. You can get the idea, you can explain whether, it's likely to fit or not and give them that confidence, before they write that offer.
Wonderful. Ian, a question we've been asking everyone who comes on the podcast, and I'll throw it to you now. If you could go back to a young Ian and give yourself some advice, what would that advice be?
Eat more vegetables, do your homework. I don't know. If I could go back, give myself some more advice, well, I think there's, that's a good question, right? Like, do I go back and talk to myself when I'm 10 or 20 or, there's all kinds of good things you can do. But I think if I could go back, I would say, save more money when you're young. You don't have as many responsibilities or things to pay for, at 15 or 20 years old. Everybody has those side jobs. I know I blew all the money I had when I was younger. Even if I saved a little bit of it, that could help for education or travel. But the main thing is I would probably just tell myself to spend more time traveling. Again, life can be pretty busy, when you get into a career. And might not be as much time to do the kind of traveling you want. But I would probably go out and go backpacking or something through Europe. I don't know. People talk about that. To me, it sounds like it would be something amazing to do that I haven't done. And having a little one on the way and a wife and a mortgage and all that kind of stuff doesn't seem quite as realistic these days as what it maybe would have been. I don't know.
Maybe in the future.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe when the kids are out of the house and they've got less responsibility, I can go out and do all kinds of crazy things again. Have a midlife crisis or something that like people talk about.
When we see you driving around Regina in a red sports car, we'll know what's going on.
Yeah. Hopefully that happens sooner than later.
Awesome. Ian, thank you very much for joining us today and spending time educating us on second homes, cabins, and cottages. We really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, Ron, thanks again for having me. I'm happy to join the call and happy to chat with you as always.
All the best.
Okay. Have a good day.
Thanks again to Ian for joining us on the program today. Really appreciated his knowledge. If you have any questions on second home properties, please message. If you enjoyed this episode, hit the like and subscribe button. I'm Ron Quaroni, your Saskatchewan mortgage professional. See you next time.
This has been the Saskatchewan Real Estate Podcast. If you like this episode, find more information and episodes on our Facebook and YouTube pages. If you'd like to be a guest or have a conversation you'd like to learn more about, let us know by messaging the show on Facebook. Thanks for listening.